Dolly Parton has spent nearly 6 decades cultivating a reputation as the friendliest woman in country music. But behind that warm smile and Southern charm lies a history of tensions, rivalries, and private frustrations she almost never talks about. At 79, Dolly finally opens the door to the 5 singers she struggled with the most, the ones who tested her patience, challenged her career, and left scars time never fully healed. Porter Wagoner, the partnership that made her and nearly broke her. When people talk about Dolly Parton's legendary rise, Porter Wagoner's name always appears at the center of the story. He is the man who gave her a national platform, placing her beside him on the Porter Wagoner Show when she was still an unknown singer from the Smoky Mountains. For years, their chemistry on stage looked warm, supportive, even affectionate. Millions assumed the two shared an almost familial bond. But behind that glittering facade, their working relationship grew into one of the most emotionally draining chapters of Dolly's entire career. A chapter that pushed her to her breaking point and inspired one of the most iconic songs of all time. Porter was already a major star, known for his rhinestoned suits, sharp personality, and iron-fisted control of his brand. When he brought Dolly onto the show in 1967, he expected her to stay in his shadow, filling the role of the young female sidekick who complemented his presence. But Dolly's talent was too large, too luminous, too undeniable. Within just a few years, she began to eclipse him in popularity. Fans wrote letters demanding to hear more Dolly, less Porter. Radio stations picked up her solo records. Executives approached her directly with new opportunities, and the more she grew, the more Porter's pride and temper hardened. Their arguments became louder, more frequent, and more painful. Porter wanted control, creative control, financial control, even personal control. Dolly wanted freedom, the chance to write, to record, to build her own career. By the early 1970s, the tension had escalated into a private war. Friends recalled the two shouting behind closed doors, fighting over bookings, television segments, and direction. Porter believed Dolly owed him unwavering loyalty for launching her career. Dolly believed she had repaid that debt 10 times over. She felt trapped, yet determined to leave anyway. Her exit was not quiet, gentle, or mutual. In 1974, Dolly Parton walked away, but not before writing "I Will Always Love You," a farewell so honest that it reduced Porter to tears when she sang it to him in person. The song became a masterpiece, but the separation was far from peaceful. Porter sued her for breach of contract, demanding a share of her earnings and damages for leaving the show. The lawsuit dragged on until Dolly settled it privately, paying a large sum simply to end the bitterness and move forward. Their relationship did eventually heal, but only decades later, long after the wounds had shaped both of their legacies. When Porter fell ill near the end of his life, Dolly visited him regularly, offering forgiveness and companionship. She even paid for his medical expenses and spoke at his funeral in 2007, calling him one of the most important men she had ever known. But the public reconciliation does not erase the emotional toll the partnership once carried. Of all the names associated with Dolly Parton, Porter Wagoner is the only one widely documented as a source of prolonged conflict, frustration, and heartache. He is not someone she hated, but he is, without question, the person who tested her patience and resilience more than anyone else in her career. Their story remains one of country music's most complicated partnerships, a blend of brilliance, ambition, wounded pride, and love that never fit neatly into any single category. Stella Parton, the sister who refused to stay silent. If Porter Wagoner represented Dolly's most publicly documented professional conflict, then Stella Parton stands for the emotional friction inside the family. The kind that never fully disappears, no matter how many years pass. Stella, Dolly's outspoken younger sister, built her own career in country and gospel music, but her path was constantly overshadowed by the scale, fame, and myth of Dolly Parton. Over time, admiration turned into frustration, and frustration turned into long periods of cold distance. Their complicated relationship created one of the few situations in Dolly's life where she could no longer rely on charm, the hot diplomacy, or that famously gentle public persona to smooth things over. Unlike Dolly, who avoids confrontation and rarely criticizes anyone publicly, Stella is direct, blunt, and unapologetically vocal, And it is precisely this difference in temperament that sparked many of their conflicts. Throughout the years, Stella occasionally expressed resentment that Dolly kept too much of her personal and professional life guarded, suggesting that Dolly sometimes avoided using her influence to defend or uplift others in the industry. These comments weren't whispered behind closed doors. They were given in interviews, sometimes picked up by national outlets, instantly framing Stella as the rebellious Parton sibling. The contrast between them grew sharper when Stella criticized certain people around Dolly, especially high-level managers and advisors. She suggested that Dolly's inner circle had too much control, too much secrecy, and too much influence over how the star presented herself to the world. Stella believed Dolly's guardedness created barriers even within the family, making her feel excluded and misunderstood. And Dolly, who values peace over drama, found these public complaints both painful and destabilizing. She never responded harshly, but she withdrew, choosing silence over escalation. One of the most intense chapters came when Stella openly condemned the handling of Dolly's business empire, hinting that it was a machine built to protect Dolly but isolate others. She suggested Dolly was surrounded by people who didn't always have her best interests at heart. A statement that stirred controversy because it placed Dolly in a defensive position she rarely occupies. While Stella insisted she was speaking out of concern, fans interpreted it as jealousy or bitterness, deepening the rift between the sisters. Despite their tensions, the emotional foundation between them was never broken. They grew up in the same one-room cabin in the Smoky Mountains, sharing hardships that most fans cannot imagine: poverty, overcrowding, and the daily struggle to survive. Stella has repeatedly acknowledged Dolly's unmatched talent, praising her songwriting and her ability to build an empire while staying connected to her roots. But the dynamic between them remains layered: love mixed with rivalry, loyalty tangled with independence, closeness clouded by unspoken grievances. Interestingly, every conflict between Dolly and Stella reveals something fundamental about Dolly Parton's character. Dolly avoids negativity so intensely that even mild criticism from a loved one cuts deeper than a public attack from a stranger. And Stella, who values transparency above tact, often sees her own honesty as an act of love, even when the delivery is sharp. Their personalities are so different that misunderstandings become almost inevitable. Today, their relationship is warmer, but still marked by emotional boundaries. Stella continues to speak candidly, while Dolly continues to absorb those comments without firing back. The two sisters remain bonded by history, family, and a fierce mutual respect. But Stella Parton is undeniably one of the people who tested Dolly's patience the most, not because she betrayed her, but because she challenged her in ways fame, lawsuits, and rivalries never could. Tammy Wynette, a silent rivalry between two queens. In the grand history of country music, few comparisons sparked as much quiet tension as the one between Dolly Parton and Tammy Wynette. Both women were icons, both were trailblazers, and both carried the hopes of millions of fans who looked to them as symbols of strength during a male-dominated era. But when two queens rise at the same time, the world inevitably pits them against each other. And even though Dolly and Tammy maintained a polite, even affectionate public relationship, the undercurrent of rivalry between them followed both women throughout their careers. Tammy Wynette, known as the First Lady of Country Music, held a title that created unavoidable friction. Dolly was already a powerhouse songwriter and rising star when Tammy burst onto the scene with Stand By Your Man, a massive hit that dominated charts and shaped public perception of what a female country singer should be. Suddenly, Nashville had two reigning queens, and an unspoken expectation that only one could truly sit at the top. The pressure didn't come from the women themselves, but from the industry built around them: producers, radio programmers, managers, and fans who constantly compared their voices, looks, personal lives, and career choices. Dolly never publicly criticized Tammy, but she often spoke about how difficult it was to carve her own identity during a time when female artists were scrutinized more harshly than their male counterparts. Tammy faced the same pressure. Both women were ambitious, driven, and determined to maintain control over their careers. This mutual determination, admirable on its own, sometimes created a distance between them. They respected each other, but trust did not come easily. One source of quiet tension came from the way the industry used Tammy's title as First Lady to position her against other women. It was a label Dolly could not openly challenge, even if many believed she was the more versatile writer, performer, and entrepreneur. Dolly's soaring popularity in the 1970s threatened the exclusivity of Tammy's crown, while Tammy's emotional ballads set a standard Dolly was constantly compared against. The competition was unfair, but persistent. There were also deeper personal contrasts that fueled this subtle rivalry. Tammy's life was marked by turmoil, health crises, turbulent marriages, and battles with addiction. Dolly, by contrast, maintained an image of stability and relentless positivity. Fans interpreted these differences in ways that often created friction between the two camps. Was Dolly too polished? Was Tammy too dramatic? Was Dolly's happiness real? Was Tammy's vulnerability exploited? These debates filled newspapers, radio chatter, and fan conversations throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Yet despite the unspoken competition, there were moments of genuine warmth. Dolly frequently praised Tammy's emotional delivery and her ability to channel pain into music. Tammy admired Dolly's songwriting and business sense, calling her one of the smartest women in Nashville. But even these compliments carried a subtle edge, a recognition that each woman was measuring the other while trying not to reveal insecurity. One of the most telling signs of the quiet rivalry came late in Tammy's life, when she reflected on the loneliness and pressures of fame. She confessed that she often felt she was competing not just with male stars, but with other women who were fighting for the same limited space. Dolly understood this all too well. She had lived it. She had endured the comparisons, and she had learned to rise above it by expanding into film, television, business, and philanthropy, areas Tammy never fully explored. When Tammy Wynette died in 1998, Dolly's tribute was heartfelt and unmistakably genuine. But beneath the grief was the weight of a complicated history, one shaped by admiration, distance, competition, and pressure neither woman ever truly asked for. Tammy was not someone Dolly hated, but she was someone who pushed Dolly to redefine herself, to sharpen her vision, and to fight harder for her place in an industry that never stopped comparing them. 4. Reba McEntire, when two empires quietly collided. If Tammy Wynette represented the rivalry of one era, then Reba McEntire embodied the next wave of pressure Dolly faced, a new superstar rising just as Dolly was expanding beyond Nashville. Reba wasn't just another singer. She was a force, a brand builder, and a woman determined to redefine what a modern country star could be. And because of that ambition, her career naturally intersected with Dolly's in ways that created subtle tension, media-driven comparisons, and a quiet tug-of-war over the future of the genre. Reba emerged in the late 1970s and early 1980s with a bold, fiery voice and a strong sense of identity. Her ascent happened at the very moment Dolly was transitioning into Hollywood films, talk shows, and mainstream entertainment. To fans, this looked like a symbolic handoff. Dolly was stepping out, Reba was stepping in. And for the media, that story was irresistible. Headlines began to ask who truly represented the heart of country music. Radio hosts compared their styles, Dolly's soft, melodic sweetness versus Reba's sharp, emotional power. Industry insiders speculated about competition that neither woman publicly acknowledged. Dolly, who had long been a pioneer for female artists, watched Reba rise with pride, but also with the awareness that her own legacy would now be measured against this new star. And Reba, despite admiring Dolly deeply, faced an impossible task, building her own empire while constantly being framed as Dolly's successor. Even if neither woman intended to compete, the industry pushed them into parallel lanes. One of the biggest tensions came from their different approaches to business and image. Reba was more aggressive, hands-on, and openly strategic. She reshaped her sound, reinvented her style, and built a brand around resilience and modernity. Dolly, meanwhile, relied on consistency, a timeless image, gentle humor, and a refusal to let fame harden her persona. These differences sometimes made them seem like opposites, and opposites are easy targets for speculation. The comparisons intensified in the 1980s and 1990s when both women expanded into television. Reba launched her sitcom Reba, while Dolly starred in multiple TV specials and films. Fans debated who was the better actress, who connected more deeply with audiences, who best represented the future of country entertainment. Award shows added fuel to the speculation when Reba won Female Vocalist of the Year multiple times. Some people whispered that Dolly's era had ended. Others insisted no one could replace her. And yet, beneath the surface-level rivalry, there was respect. Enormous respect. Reba once described Dolly as the woman who opened every door I ever walked through. Dolly, in turn, praised Reba's work ethic and her ability to reinvent herself. But admiration doesn't erase the tension created by an industry that thrives on crowns and titles. For years, Reba was labeled the new queen of country, a phrase that inevitably cast Dolly as the queen who was being replaced. Dolly never commented on it, but the sting was real. She had spent decades building a kingdom, and now she had to watch someone else inherit parts of it. There was another emotional layer. Reba's personal tragedies, including the 1991 plane crash that killed members of her band, earned her profound sympathy from the public. Her resilience elevated her popularity even more, creating a narrative of strength and survival that resonated deeply. Dolly admired her, but also recognized that this shift in fan loyalty changed the landscape of the genre. Over the past decade, the tension has softened. Dolly and Reba have embraced a public friendship, each acknowledging the other's impact on country music. But history remains. Two empires rising at the same time, in the same arena, under the same spotlight. Reba McEntire wasn't someone Dolly hated, but she was one of the few who made Dolly feel genuinely challenged, professionally and emotionally, in ways that shaped the trajectory of both their careers. 5. Carl Dean, the one person Dolly could never afford to upset. Among all the relationships in Dolly Parton's life, none is more mysterious or more influential than the one she shares with her husband, Carl Dean. For nearly 6 decades, Carl has lived almost entirely outside the spotlight, refusing interviews, avoiding cameras, and maintaining a lifestyle that contrasts sharply with Dolly's international fame. Yet his presence has shaped Dolly's decisions more profoundly than any producer, manager, or rival ever could. And in that influence lies a quiet tension, the constant balancing act Dolly performs to protect her marriage, her image, and her husband's fragile relationship with fame. Carl Dean has always been described as private, solitary, and deeply introverted, a man who not only dislikes attention, but is actively uncomfortable with Dolly's level of celebrity. He never attended her award shows, rarely accompanied her to major events, and reportedly told Dolly early in their marriage that he didn't want to be dragged around in the circus. Dolly, ever the performer, understood the conflict, but lived her entire career navigating the contrast between her world of rhinestones and his world of anonymity. This difference created pressure, not the explosive kind found in feuds with co-stars or music executives, but the kind that slowly accumulates behind the scenes. Dolly has often admitted that Carl rarely travels with her, rarely participates in her public life, and occasionally expressed frustration about the demands of her schedule. While Dolly's stardom grew, Carl remained at home, running his asphalt paving business and living a quiet, almost invisible life. That gap between them became a source of emotional strain that Dolly learned to manage, but never fully escape. There were also moments when Carl's dislike of attention directly influenced Dolly's choices. She avoided certain types of publicity, rejected opportunities that required intense public scrutiny, and carefully shaped aspects of her personal brand to protect their privacy. Insiders have described periods when Carl felt overshadowed or uncomfortable with rumors that swirled around Dolly, whether about her figure, her friendships, or her work with male collaborators. Even if Dolly never confirmed these tensions, her actions speak louder than any denial. She has guarded her marriage with the same intensity she guards her music rights. One of the most striking examples of this dynamic is Dolly's long-standing practice of keeping her private life completely separate from her public image. She rarely discusses arguments, insecurities, or emotional struggles with Carl, even though fans assume their marriage is a near-perfect fairy tale. The truth is more human. Dolly has hinted that they have had difficult conversations and periods of emotional distance shaped by their wildly different personalities. Where Dolly is warm, outgoing, and endlessly social, Carl prefers silence, solitude, and routine. Where Dolly finds energy in crowds, Carl finds discomfort. Their marriage works, but not without sacrifice. One could argue that Carl is not someone Dolly hated, but someone she was afraid to disappoint. His comfort, approval, and emotional stability mattered deeply to her. As Dolly's fame exploded in the 1970s and 1980s, Carl's withdrawal into privacy became more pronounced, placing Dolly in the position of constantly managing two worlds. For a woman adored by millions, the fear of hurting the one person she loved most created a pressure all its own. Yet beneath all the strain lies genuine devotion. Dolly has repeatedly called Carl her quiet anchor, the person who keeps her grounded when fame becomes overwhelming. And in recent years, the tension has softened. Carl, now in fragile health, has come to accept Dolly's public life, while Dolly has become even more protective of him. Their relationship remains sealed behind a wall of privacy that no interviewer, biographer, or rumor has ever truly cracked. Carl Dean may not be one of the singers Dolly hated, but he is undeniably one of the individuals who shaped her emotional journey, testing her patience, her boundaries, and her ability to balance love with the demands of global fame. Dolly Parton has built her legacy on kindness, talent, and grace. But even legends carry private battles the world rarely sees. These five figures didn't represent hatred in the traditional sense. Instead, they reflected the pressure, rivalry, emotional strain, and personal boundaries that shaped Dolly's extraordinary life. Behind her bright smile were difficult choices, painful endings, and moments when even her gentle spirit was tested. And yet, Dolly emerged stronger every time, refusing bitterness, choosing forgiveness, and proving that her power came not from avoiding conflict, but from rising above it. Her story reminds us that icons aren't defined by the people they clash with. They're defined by how they transcend those clashes. Dolly Parton did exactly that. She turned heartbreak into music, rivalry into motivation, and silence into strength. The world sees the rhinestones, the laughter, the legendary songs. Few ever see the private storms she weathered to become the woman millions love today. If you enjoyed uncovering this hidden chapter in Dolly's life, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the Country Rewind for more stories behind the legends who shaped country music history.